Okay, we are recording. I am so excited this morning. I have a guest. It is Katie Garrett, and I'm going to read her background here. Katie became interested in health when her mom was diagnosed with fibromyalgia during her childhood. As a college student, she came down with her own autoimmune disease issues. After health coaching for 5 years, she became one of the first practitioners in the country to have a master's degree in both nutrition and functional medicine. She has obtained the highest credentials in her field, Certified Nutritionist Specialist, or CNS. Katie now runs her own practice in Fort Worth, working with patients to improve digestion, energy, and weight, and reverse chronic illness and diseases. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Katie Garrett, and she's going to speak to us this morning on the missing link in SIBO motility. Thank you so much, Katie, for joining us. You can
Thank you,
take it
Tracy.
away.
I have a little confession to make to start off with. I listened to Kieran's, all of his webinars, and he did one last week, I think with Siobhan Sarna. And he was like, as he was going through, he's like, oh, I really wanted to add in a couple more slides here, but I was doing this at 3 a.m. So I didn't have time to look up how histamine medications affect your parietal cells in your stomach, And I totally judged him. I was like, you should not be up at 3 a.m. That's not good for your microbiome. And then last night, I'm putting together some slides, and then I kept getting interested in this thing and then this thing. And then it was 12:30, and I was like, I'm doing what Kieran did. I have no room for judgment.
There you go. No judgment.
Yeah, it's very easy to get lost in PubMed. I'm sure all of you guys can relate. Okay, so let me screen share here so that we can get started with the presentation. All right, can you guys see?
Yes, I see your presentation.
Okay, perfect. So the missing link in SIBO motility. So I'm going to share with you guys some interesting things I came across in PubMed that no one's really been talking about in any of these SIBO seminars or summits. So first, starting with the root causes of SIBO. It's not just a bacterial overgrowth. There's a reason why that occurred, right? And so it's kind of like, I talk to my patients about how if you have a swamp and you have all of this mosquitoes and bugs and stuff like that growing from the swamp and you want to get rid of it, you can't just spray some insecticide and it's going to go away, right? You'll kill the mosquitoes, but if the swamp is still there, it's going to come right back. So you have to kill the mosquitoes and you have to drain the swamp to get rid of the problem. So ways that you drain the swamp, is looking at all the things on this slide. And so a big one is that top one when talking about HCl, bile, enzymes. If you don't have enough of these, one, you're missing some antimicrobial components, right? So your stomach acid, your bile, they will help to decrease the bacteria that could overgrow into the small intestine. But also, if you're not breaking down your food, then now you have more food to make it to, the ileum where a lot of times SIBO occurs, to make it down all the way down the small intestine and still be able to feed bacteria there because you're not breaking it down. So that digestion part is a huge part. And then the second one, post-infectious IBS. So, they've done a lot of research over just the last 5 years to understand that a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times SIBO can come, SIBO is part of IBS, and that can come because of an infection. And then with the infection, like a food poisoning, that you can have a reaction against your own MMC, your migrating motor complex. And that helps to keep things moving through. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today, is that motility component. And then you can see some of the other reasons. Under the structural, one thing I just thought was really interesting there is that sometimes you can have adhesions from huge amounts of inflammation. It's not always surgery. It's not like scar tissue. It could just be from diverticulosis or endometriosis. You can have adhesions when you just have had a lot of inflammation in one place. So be thinking about that too, not just surgery. Okay, so this second root cause of SIBO, how do we know if that's actually going on? So there's a test called the IBS Smart. It is a second generation, so it replaces IBS Check that came out in 2016. And it can detect these antibodies to CD/TB and vinculin. So CDTB is cytolethal descending toxin, B, and that toxin comes from food poisoning. So it comes from like Shigella, Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter jejuni, which causes appendicitis in like half of cases. And so they might be able to stop all the appendix surgeries. I don't know if you've heard about that. That's another tangent. And so these bacteria, these gram-negative bacteria, we know about LPS, right? They release LPS, and Megaspore helps to bring down the LPS. They also release this toxin, CDTB. And this toxin causes apoptosis, so it causes cell death of your intestinal lining and of your lymphocytes. So it like makes you have a leaky gut, and it suppresses your immune system. So not a good guy. So you can check the IBS Smart, and if they have this antibody, you know that in sometime in the last couple of years that they've had a really bad bout of food poisoning, enough that this toxin has been wreaking havoc in their gut. And then the vinculin is this protein that attaches the interstitial cells of Cajal, ICC. So these cells, kind of when you think about, two cells next to each other, the vinculin helps to kind of attach them, kind of like zonulin in the epithelial lining. And the ICC controls the migrating motor complex. It controls peristalsis. So it's the pacemaker of the intestines. And so if we have antibodies to that, that means you're not going to have good conduction through your intestines. So that's actually an autoimmune component. So you can like detect autoimmunity to your gut through this test. And so you're going to have a lack of motility, and then you're going to have be a lot more predisposed to IBS. But you can see here in the stats that it was most specific for IBS-D. So if someone has IBS-C, there's a 3 out of 4 chance that they're going to come back negative on this test if they have constipation. But everyone, kind of throws that away and says like, oh, well, so don't run it on IBS-C. But if you look at the stats, like 1 out of every 4 patients had it. It's not useless. And they had it, 10% higher amounts than the control. So it can actually be ordered online. So if you don't have an account with them and you want your patient to have the test run, then you can send them to their website, and the patient themselves can order it. The IBS Smart has like a doctor who reads over a questionnaire and approves or doesn't approve the test. So this is a little graphic from IBS Smart on that whole mechanism that I just talked about. And so you can kind of see how it goes from that CDTB to now the intestines are not functioning correctly. But the interesting thing is that this vinculin and the ICC, these cells, everyone talks about them in SIBO. And so it's like, yeah, they prevent the small intestine from moving. So in my head, I'm just like, okay, these are small intestine cells. But then on Saturday, I had a little thought of, wait a second, if it's moving the gut, I'm sure there's not compartmentalization within the intestines. So I looked into the research, and these ICCs exist in the stomach, in the gallbladder, in the pancreatic ducts. So it's really part of the whole digestive system. It's not just a small intestinal issue. And so if someone is showing up positive on this test, or they've had some bad IBS since having food poisoning, then it's a pretty good chance that these ICCs are not really pushing bile very well out of the bile ducts, pushing enzymes out of the pancreatic ducts, and not allowing for good stomach emptying. I'm going to take a drink of water. I talk fast. Sorry about that. So one of the problems with maybe heartburn and indigestion and dyspepsia and all that could be that the ICCs in the stomach aren't really working as well. And so you're not having, good stomach emptying and not good small intestine emptying. And you don't have good production of bile because those bile ducts aren't moving. And all of that is going to lead to bacterial overgrowth. Okay, so what do we do about it? The good stuff. So artichoke extract. I'm someone who's always like, I want everything validated. So when I hear someone's like, oh, it increases bile, I'm like, is that just because it's bitter and it's part of this generic category, or has it actually been shown? And so I did some research, and there's dozens of human clinical trials showing that it does increase bile. But I really liked this one because it had a nice pretty graph that went with it. And I'm a visual person. So you can see the one on the right, that is the patients who were injected with artichoke extract. And then the one on the left is patients who were just injected with saline. So there's a huge difference that is in bile volume. So there's a huge difference there. And you can see at the bottom that they attribute it to partly dyskinesia of the bile ducts for why that they were not having as good volume, and how artichoke is helping them. So, that means that artichoke was helping to improve the nerve function and get it to contract. And so that could obviously be very helpful for people struggling with that full digestive tract motility issue. But back to this slide, it has been tested in IBS patients, which we know like 2/3 to 3/4 are actually SIBO. And 96% said that yes, it was a good treatment. So that'd be pretty nice to have that for my patients. I don't know, most of my patients, it does not work on 96% of people. So that's a pretty good stat. And then with people with dyspepsia, overall symptoms decreased by 40%. But when you look at the graphs of how things improve, it can take 1 to 2 months. So if someone starts on it and you follow up in 2 weeks and they're like, it doesn't work, I'm not noticing a difference, doesn't mean it's not working. It's just that your body's very complicated and it needs a little bit more time. And then ginger. So we've got artichoke helping with motility. We have it helping to get bile out. And then ginger also helps with motility. So able to, we have those damaged interstitial cells of Cajal. They also, not just the migrating motor complex, so not just for when you're fasting, that sweeping motion, getting all the debris out, but the ICCs also help with interdigestive peristalsis. So it helps to mix your food and produce chyme, where your food is mixing with all your digestive juices. So you can have great enzyme function, but if you don't have anything to mix those enzymes into your food, it's still not really going to work. So the ginger actually can help with both that interdigestion and the fasting states contractions of the stomach and of the intestines. And then I put on here modulates the 5-HT4 receptor. And that's because, I don't know if you guys have heard of Resolor. It's recently become available in the United States as a pro-motility medication. And it's kind of considered like the darling of SIBO to prevent relapse. And it works via the 5-HT4 receptor. And so does ginger. So that's kind of a neat thing to be able to see that it has that same mechanism as one of the most proven pharmaceuticals. But in addition, has all these other benefits. So you can read that third bullet point there about how it helps to prevent against a lot of these symptoms, but it even helps on an inflammatory level too. It does lower a lot of different inflammatory markers in people who are having digestive dysfunction, as well as in some healthy people, but you don't have to worry about, when I hear about anti-inflammatories, you think about okay, if it's blocking COX-1, then that's what creates ulcers in the intestines. That's not a good thing. But the cool thing about any natural supplements is that they're modulators, right? So I just love how nature has figured that out. And so it only will lower COX-1 in someone who has it elevated. So that's what that second study in the middle is talking about, is people who were healthy didn't lower COX-1. But if you had a high risk for colorectal cancer, then it did lower it and kind of bring it down to normal levels. So it's very modulating for inflammation. And then the last one, it's not always where more is better. So in the artichoke study, they found that there was not a significant difference between the 320 milligrams or 640 milligrams. And then in the ginger study, they found things got actually worse when they increased the dose. So we want to, try to keep things in that same therapeutic dosing range that most of the studies have been in. So what can help us get all of these nutrients in and improve the motility, improve digestion? And so that's why I've been really excited about the MegaGuard and have started using it more in my patients. The licorice, I didn't even talk about that today because it's not a motility thing, but you can see the list there. These, I literally copied and pasted this from 2 review studies. So this is what, the scientific literature says about it. So it's pretty amazing. And we know with, bacterial overgrowth, immune system trouble, something that can be antiviral, antibacterial, that's going to be very helpful. And then the artichoke, a little reminder there of both the decontamination from the bile as well as the improvement in motility. And then the ginger, anti-inflammatory and pro-motility. So several beneficial mechanisms. Some people might be concerned because it doesn't have the history of use in SIBO. And so usually a recommendation for motility is going to be 1 gram of ginger. So I went to the research and I found a study in which they studied about 10 to 15 different supplements from pharmacies and stores, and they tried to quantify the gingerol content. And it ended up being around 12 grams, or 12 milligrams per gram. And so that ends up being about 12 milligrams of gingerols, which is in the 2-cap dose of the MegaGuard. So that's kind of cool. So we do still get that same ginger, and it's the gingerols that have the motility effect. And then this is what it looks like on there. You can see all those therapeutic doses. That's what was used in the clinical trials. But again, I wouldn't recommend, based on the studies, that you say, oh, well, this is so helpful. My patient's having such bad symptoms, so I should do 2 at lunch and 2 at dinner. You might not see as great an effect. All right, so that's all I got for you guys.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Wow, Katie, that was so great. I learned so much. You are a great presenter too.
Thanks.
So I'm gonna get my questions here. All right. Can we go back and tell us some of the root causes of SIBO?
Sure. With SIBO, there's predisposing conditions. And then there's also conditions in which it correlates. So that can make it a little bit tricky to figure out the root causes. But I can go ahead and screen share that again. So let me go back up. Okay. So you've got the digestive issues, and then low IgA, also a root cause, because your immune system's not being able to detect that those bacteria are overgrowing, so they're not producing anything to kill them. And that can be measured in a stool test. And then PPI, so the proton pump inhibitors. Some recent clinical trials showing not as big of a problem as they once thought, because it can actually have somewhat of a motility effect. So, but definitely is correlated with it. So there's a higher chance. Levothyroxine, there's one study showing that patients who took levothyroxine increased the risk the greatest. So it was like 4.5 times greater than anything else, like bowel surgery, opioid use, all that stuff. So if someone is on T4 only, that's something to be thinking about. And then you've got the adhesions, blockages, anything that's preventing normal movement through the gastrointestinal tract and a structural issue. In the conditions for fibromyalgia, this is what made me test myself because I have fibromyalgia, and there's a study showing that 42 out of 42 patients had SIBO in a fibromyalgia study. So there's nothing, there's no study in which 100% of people have it. So there's a huge correlation there. So I would definitely be thinking that in any fibromyalgia patients. And then there's other conditions in which it's associated with. So there's, these ones here, there's like a causal reason, right? Like scleroderma, Ehlers-Danlos, the tissue's not moving correctly. And so, Parkinson's, we've got nerve issues, fibromyalgia, nerve issues. And so there's other conditions like restless leg syndrome and rosacea that have been shown to be correlated with the SIBO, but we don't know if there's like a causation mechanism.
Right. That just emphasizes how important the gut is for the entire body. And when you mention low bile, what I've been learning about recently is how the dysbiosis caused by SIBO can unconjugate bile, and this vicious cycle just sets up. So yeah. Okay. And then what does the IBS Smart test measure? I know you went over that, but can you just summarize that again, just so that we can have like a quick description?
Yeah. So that is going to look at antibodies that develop after food poisoning that will negatively impact motility.
Okay.
It's
Super.
kind of an easy summary there.
Yeah, and then we did get some questions in chat here. So it has to do with how the MegaGuard works. But could you go through the best dose? I know you said not to use too much because it could get some negative, but how have you found the dosing works best for you? 1 or 2, and how often, and before or after meals or with meals?
Yeah, so you would definitely want to do the 2 capsule dose. You wouldn't want to just do 1. Tracy, you've said this before. Most of us who work with sensitive patients kind of have this blanket statement that you always start with 1 and then just make sure that the patient's doing okay, and then go up to 2 if they've been fine for a couple of days. And so I would just keep it with 1 at lunch and 1 with dinner. And in terms of, when you take it, normal digestion does start when you're looking at food. So like when you're getting food prepared, that's when you'd already be able to detect some, increase in bile, increase in stomach acid, that kind of stuff. So that's probably going to be the best time for like a natural reason. But you can change it depending on the patient's symptoms, right? So if like they tend to get super nauseous like first thing in the morning, and they have this like pressure and they don't feel like they can even eat, then maybe they take one, first thing in the morning, and see if that helps to release one of those symptoms and get things moving so that they can eat. So I don't think there's any like hard and fast rule around that. The dosing probably, but maybe when you take it, if you're trying to naturally reproduce digestion, it would be right before the meal. But you could probably change that based on symptoms. What do you think, Tracy?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, when you work with enough people, you find out that the 20% of the very sensitive people take 80% of your time. So just adopting the low and go slow is good for everybody, just to find that 20% and make sure that you can alter their protocol so that they'll stay compliant. There was something else when you were talking that brought bloat. Have you found that this formula works well for bloat, and do you see a lot of bloat with SIBO?
Definitely bloat with SIBO, yes. Doesn't have to be there. It usually is there, but when I say doesn't have to be there, it means the patient doesn't have to know it. So I have treated patients with SIBO, and once they start their treatment, then they're like, oh my gosh, I was bloated. I didn't even know, because it was just always their state of being, or sometimes if they have extra weight, they're not really sure what's going on. So yes, bloating pretty much is always part of SIBO, but the patient might not know it. And it might not be the typical, like they've got a flat stomach and now it's, fully distended. That bloating there might be less give in the tissue of the abdomen. So it might manifest more as like a heartburn, or, as like a reflux, and instead of going out, it might be going up a little bit more. So I've seen that as well. A patient who had a lot of pressure here, not really a lot of bloat, but then was positive for SIBO, and, is improving. So what was the other part of that question?
If MegaGuard has helped with bloat?
Oh, yes, it does. And so I had, sometimes I've used it before doing SIBO testing as a way to kind of be like, do they need the SIBO testing? So like I had a patient who, she would have vomiting like once or twice a day. And she's seen lots of doctors, and they're all just like, oh, I can't really help you, take an antacid. And she also would have loose stools. Was just having a lot of issues. And she had already removed gluten, and she had removed dairy, and wasn't getting totally better. And was having this, this constant bloating. She wouldn't wake up bloated, be with food. That's another sign that it's probably more SIBO. But so I originally thought like, okay, MegaGuard, so we can try to get rid of the nausea, the vomiting. But then when she got on it, she also had a reduction in her bloat. And that kind of went along with a low FODMAP diet. So she had removed the main parts of the FODMAPs, the dairy and the gluten. But then she saw some improvement on the bloating with the MegaGuard, and then more improvement with the low FODMAP diet. And so that's when it was kind of like, okay, let's spend the money and do the test.
Okay. So you're doing primarily one with lunch and one with dinner? Is
Yes.
that okay? And then what about constipation and diarrhea? I know anything can happen with somebody's microbiome, and that's kind of the approach I've always taken, is that you can't always say, SIBO is just going to be related with constipation, because there's going to be some people that, you know, there are no explanations. But
Right.
have you seen that there is a correlation with both constipation and diarrhea, and that MegaGuard has helped with constipation and diarrhea?
Yes, there is definitely a correlation with constipation and diarrhea. So, majority of patients will have, be on that IBS spectrum. So they will have, either constipation, diarrhea, or mixed. They can still have a few normal bowel movements each week, but they'll have that component usually. I have had a patient test positive for SIBO, and they had normal bowel movements, but that is definitely more so the exception.
Mm-hmm.
And then MegaGuard helping with bowel movements, I'm not sure I could say, because I hardly ever just do that alone. So I'm usually using Megaspore or Restore Flora along with the MegaGuard. And
Mm-hmm.
so if people have the loose stools, then yes, I always see an improvement with doing the Megaspore. If they have constipation, that's something that usually takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't seen so far the MegaGuard on its own helping with the constipation, but I have seen it helping with the loose stools.
Yeah, and that's, where that IgG 2000 has helped the constipation. But in your case, and it's important to say this, is that people that have beef allergies need to avoid that product. So, but it those that can take it, it helps neutralize the lipopolysaccharide, which in some cases it what shuts down the bowels in that migrating motor complex.
Yes, and I forgot to mention that part. So lipopolysaccharide is a toxin, right? And cytolethal descending toxin, that's a toxin. What do
Mhm,
toxins do? They go to the liver and they produce more of a negative impact on the liver. And
mhm,
so then things start to shut down more. You have more damage because you're absorbing these toxins. So how much even more important is it
mhm,
for that patient to have like above average bile flow, because they're getting all of these toxins from their own microbiome.
mhm.
And that's one of the benefits of artichoke leaf, is that it's actually hepatoprotective and can actually increase glutathione levels, and so can ginger. So yeah, you get all these added benefits from it for sure.
Super. Now, what would you say your primary SIBO test is? The ones that you mentioned, you first go after checking for the toxins um, in the SMART test, or do you do other things too?
So breath test first.
Mm,
So the breath test not only is cheaper, but it's also going to guide treatment a lot more, because when you go through SIBO treatment, you usually start with some degree of diet, and then you do the antimicrobials. And then after you're done with the antimicrobials, you move on to the prokinetic. And so the IBS Smart test lets you know, does this patient have to be like on a long-term prokinetic because they have this autoimmune component? Are the numbers like sky high and they will be at like lifelong risk of relapse and they might need to be on a prokinetic forever? So I can kind of guide that a little bit more, and you don't really need that information until after the SIBO has been cleared. So I like to do the SIBO breath testing first, and then we discuss that on one visit. And then when they come back for their next visit, we go over the root causes, and that's when they understand that this motility issue is part of the root causes. And I offer the IBS Smart test.
okay, super. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions in chat, and you've answered all my questions excellently. And I just loved having you, Katie, and thank you so much for all your good work and your research. And as you know, Microbiome Labs is very thankful. We were thrilled, and in the forum, everybody got real excited. So they'll be excited to see that you did a video that they can watch too. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracy, for inviting me to this. And thank you for just having a heart for getting providers together and getting as much research and education out there as possible.
absolutely, we want the smartest practitioners.
I think you're on your way.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'll be posting this shortly and sending it to you. And have a terrific rest of your day.